I was 9 years old the first time my mother told someone I was a thief. We were at my aunt's house in Mississauga for Thanksgiving dinner. I had taken a small decorative pin from a dish on the hallway table because I thought it was pretty and I wanted to look at it. When my aunt noticed it was gone, my mother pointed at me before anyone else said a word. "Check her pockets," she said. "She does this." The pin was there. Everyone at the table watched me put it back. I cried the whole drive home, and my mother told me that crying was just another way of lying. I am 31 years old now. My name is Rachel Holt. And that moment, that specific humiliation in my aunt's hallway in front of people who were supposed to love me, was the first in a very long education about who my parents had decided I was going to be. For the next 2 decades, I tried to undo it. I became meticulous about honesty to the point where people sometimes found me blunt. I paid every bill on time, kept records of everything, apologized for things that were not my fault because I had learned early that preemptive apology was faster than trying to prove innocence. I built a career in healthcare administration at a mid-sized hospital in Hamilton. I had a clean apartment, a reliable car, and a reputation among my colleagues as someone who got things done without drama. None of it was ever enough for my parents. My father, Doug Holt, was a retired electrician from Brantford who had a particular talent for making you feel that your accomplishments were just barely acceptable. My mother, Sheila, kept a running internal catalog of my failures and could retrieve any entry from it with perfect recall at any family gathering. Then I met Owen at a mutual friend's birthday party in downtown Hamilton. He was a project manager for a civil engineering firm, originally from Kelowna, steady and thoughtful in a way that I had not encountered before in someone I was attracted to. He spilled red wine on my sleeve within 10 minutes of being introduced and immediately offered his own jacket without making a production of it. I told him not to worry. He said, "I'm still going to worry," and something about the honesty of that small sentence got under my skin in the best possible way. We dated for 18 months. He met my parents 4 times in that period, and 4 times he came home to our apartment afterward and asked me, with genuine concern in his voice, whether I was okay. He could read what family dinners cost me. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just kept showing up beside me. He proposed on the back deck of our apartment on a Tuesday evening in October when the leaves along the ravine behind the building had gone full amber and red. No restaurant, no crowd. Just him and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple square-cut sapphire, and his voice going slightly unsteady when he got to the part where he asked. I said yes before he could finish the sentence. We planned the wedding for a Saturday in late June. The engagement dinner was set for the Friday night before, a private room at a restaurant called the Watershed, a place with exposed timber beams and long communal tables and candles in mason jars. We had invited 30 people, both families, our closest friends. It was supposed to be quiet and warm and exactly what we had worked toward. 11 days before the wedding, Owen called me at work. His voice was the kind of careful, that means the person holding the phone is trying very hard not to break something. He told me his parents had received a visitor that morning. My father had driven from Brantford to their house in Dundas, unannounced, and had sat at their kitchen table and told them that I had a criminal record. Specifically, he had told them that 7 years ago, I had been convicted of fraud, that I had stolen money from an employer and had spent 8 months in a federal correctional facility in Ontario. He brought nothing to support this. He didn't need to. He was a white-haired retired tradesman in a sensible jacket, and he spoke with the calm authority of someone reporting a fact. Owen's mother, who had always been nothing but gracious to me, had not called me directly. She had called Owen. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage with my phone against my ear, and I felt the exact same sensation I had felt at 9 years old in my aunt's hallway. The floor dropping, the room narrowing, the understanding that someone who was supposed to protect me had just done the opposite. Owen did not accuse me. He said, "I need you to tell me what's true." That sentence was the most important thing anyone had said to me in years. Not "how could you" or "I can't believe," just an open space where he was actually waiting for me to fill it. So I drove to his parents' house after work, and I sat in their living room in Dundas, and I told all 3 of them the truth. 7 years ago, I had worked as an administrative coordinator at a private wellness clinic in Burlington. The office manager, a woman I had trusted, had been falsifying invoices and routing money into a personal account. When the clinic's accountants flagged the discrepancies, she redirected the investigation toward me. There was a formal internal inquiry. I was suspended without pay for 6 weeks. I had a lawyer. The case was eventually dropped because there was no evidence against me, because I had done nothing wrong, but dropped quietly, the way those things often go, with no public correction and no apology. I had never been charged. I had never been convicted. I had never been anywhere near a correctional facility. I had a clean record and I could prove it. What I also told them was that my parents knew this. My mother had been the one who sat with me through that 6-week suspension. She had driven me to my lawyer's office twice. She had seen the documentation when it was over. She knew exactly what had happened and exactly what had not happened. For 7 years I had never fully understood why she had never simply said, out loud and plainly, to anyone who brought it up, my daughter was cleared. Now I was starting to understand that the ambiguity had been intentional. Owen's mother, whose name was Frances, listened to everything I said and then stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with tea. She set it in front of me without ceremony and said, I want to see whatever documentation you have. Not I believe you and not I don't know what to think. Just that. Show me. I respected her for it. I went home that night and pulled every file I had kept from that period. The lawyer's correspondence. The final written determination from the clinic's accountants. The letter from my former employer confirming my departure had not been for cause. I scanned everything and emailed it to Owen and his mother that evening. The damage, though, was still in the room. My parents had calculated the timing precisely. 11 days before a wedding is close enough to the altar that doubt has nowhere to go but forward. They knew it would sit between Owen and me like something we could not fully name. They had planted it where it would do the most work. What they had not calculated was who would call me 4 days later, and what that person would have to say. Her name was Gillian Marsh. We had worked together at the Burlington Clinic during the year of the investigation. She had been a billing coordinator, and she had quietly, without anyone asking her to, kept a personal record of everything she observed during those 6 weeks. She had not been called as a witness during the internal review. She had given a brief statement, and that was the end of her formal involvement. But she had kept copies of her own notes, and she had kept them for 7 years in a folder in her filing cabinet, because, she told me, something about the way the whole thing had been handled had never felt right to her. She called me because she had recently learned, through a former colleague, that my father had been making calls. Not just to Owen's parents. He had called at least 2 other people in the weeks before our wedding. Gillian had heard from a mutual acquaintance that my father had been saying things about me, about a record, about jail, and she had pulled out her folder and started making her own calls. What Gillian had found was this. My former office manager, the one who had redirected the investigation toward me, had been terminated from a subsequent position in Oakville 18 months after leaving the Burlington Clinic. The termination had been for exactly the same conduct: falsified invoices, redirected funds. This time there had been a formal charge. The documentation was public record, and in the paperwork from that second investigation, my name appeared in a footnote as a former employee who had been incorrectly identified during a prior inquiry, which was as close as institutional language ever comes to saying someone was wrongly accused. Gillian had compiled everything: her original notes from the Burlington inquiry, the public records from the Oakville case, a written statement from herself, and something else. She had spoken to a woman who had worked at the clinic after I left, who had overheard a conversation, years ago, filed away and forgotten until now, in which my mother had called the clinic directly and spoken to a receptionist, asking questions about the case that no one had ever been asked to answer publicly. Questions that suggested she already knew the outcome and was not asking to be informed but to confirm what she could use. Gillian drove from Burlington to Hamilton to bring me everything in person. We sat at my kitchen table on a Wednesday evening, and she put a binder in my hands and said, I should have done this sooner. I'm sorry it's this close to your wedding. I told her she was here now, and that was what mattered. She cried a little. So did I. Owen sat across the table and read every page. The morning of the engagement dinner, I made a decision that I want to be clear about. I did not invite my parents to come so they could be ambushed. I invited them because I had spent 31 years letting them leave rooms after doing damage, and I was finished with that. I wanted them in the room when the room said back to them what they had done. I wanted Owen's parents in the same space. I wanted the people who had listened to my father's story to be present when the full story was told. I also want to be honest, there was a part of me that was simply tired, tired of managing the revelation, of parceling it out privately, of having the truth exist only in documents and quiet conversations. I had been a thief at 9 years old in a hallway and a fraudster at 31 at a kitchen table in Dundas, and I was done letting those versions of me have space in other people's minds. The watershed was beautiful that evening. The timber beams caught the last of the June light through the tall windows, and the mason jar candles threw everything in warm gold. Owen's family was already at the table when I arrived. Frances stood up and embraced me and held on for a moment longer than a regular greeting, and I understood what she was telling me. My parents arrived at 7:15, my father in his good blazer, my mother in the blouse she wore to events where she expected to be photographed. They sat at the far end of the table and my father ordered a scotch, and my mother smiled at people she didn't know very well. At 7:45 I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I want to be precise about that, because people sometimes imagine these moments as operatic, as all tears and trembling hands. It was not that. I was very calm in the way that you become calm when you have finally stopped hoping for a different outcome and have simply accepted the one that is true. I said that, before we moved forward with the evening, there was something I needed to address. I said that 11 days ago, my father had visited Owen's parents and told them I had a criminal record and had served time in a federal facility. I said that was false, that I had documentation proving it was false, and that my parents had been present for the events that made it false, which meant this had not been a misunderstanding. I set the binder on the table in front of them. I did not slide it to them or make a gesture of it. I just set it down. Then I told them that I had spent 22 years working to be someone they would consider worth believing. I said I was done with that work. I said they were welcome to take the binder on their way out. My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked at the table. Neither of them spoke. I asked them to leave. They stood up and my father picked up the binder and they walked up out of the watershed, and I watched the door close behind them, and I felt something release in my chest that I had not known was held. The table was very quiet for a moment. Owen reached across and took my hand. Then Frances stood up. She picked up her wine glass and she looked at me and she said, "To Rachel." And the whole table raised their glasses and set it back. And I stood there in the gold light of that restaurant with my fiancé's hand in mine and Jillian 3 seats down watching me with careful eyes, and I let it be enough. We got married the next afternoon at a small ceremony in the Dundas Valley Conservation Area. Just the trees and the light coming through them, and 30 people who were actually happy to be there. Owen cried during his vows in that way he has of not being embarrassed about it. I held it together until he got to the part about choosing me every day, and then I didn't hold it together at all, and Jillian handed me a tissue from the front row with the calm efficiency of someone who had been paying attention. My parents were not there. I want to say something about that, because I have noticed that people sometimes expect you to feel a particular way about the absence of your parents on your wedding day. They expect grief, or they expect defiance, or they expect some complicated mixture that proves the wound is still open. What I felt was mostly just the warm weight of the afternoon and the way Owen looked at me while I was still getting my words together, patient and present and entirely sure. I am Rachel Holt, now Rachel Sinclair, and I am 31 years old. I spent most of those years trying to correct a story that was never going to be corrected from the inside. You cannot prove yourself to someone who has decided that disbelieving you is how they keep you close. The only thing you can do is build something real enough that their version of you no longer has anywhere to land. If you are reading this from a place where someone keeps rewriting what you know to be true about yourself, I want you to know that the engagement dinner is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is exactly where the real one begins. If this story found something in you, please subscribe to this channel. We tell stories for the people who needed to hear them today. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for the next one.